things called a vanity. But vanity is an interesting word in the Greek, mataios, and it means that which is empty, futile, useless, vain. It's useless. This is the best word for it. Pagan thinking is useless. You know why? It goes nowhere. It accomplishes nothing. It performs nothing. It gains nothing. It is useless. Perfect illustration of this can be seen in the book of Ecclesiastes. The wisest man, the richest man, the man with the most women, the man with the most prestige, sums it all up and opens up his book this way: vanity, vanity, all is vanity. He closes the second chapter of his book as everything is vanity and vexation of spirit. Nothing means anything to me. Never ceases to amaze me how people will blow their money, blow their bodies, blow their minds, and sometimes blow their head off, trying to find something that's never, ever, ever there. He says their thinking is empty, useless, goes nowhere, produces nothing. And it's, in other words, what Jesus said, without me, ye can do what? Nothing. Nothing. There's a second thing that characterizes pagan lifestyle, the old man. Not only do they function in their own heads, doing their own thing that they dream up. And by the way, that's in contrast to us, isn't it? We function in response to God's thinking and His will and His purposes, and there's purpose and meaning. But the second thing is they're ignorant of the truth. Not only self-centered and empty, but ignorant of the truth. Look at verse 18. Having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their heart. Not only are they self-centered and useless, but they are ignorant. Now, you know, you can't really face people in our world who don't know Christ and tell them they're ignorant as a general rule, because we're such an educated society that people take that as an insult. And no society in history has ever been much more educated than we have. But we're drowning in college graduates. We don't even know what to do with them all. We got all kinds of people with quote-unquote education. But as the Apostle Paul said, they are ever learning, but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Men have a natural inability to understand the things of God. They just can't. They have a useless mind, and a useless mind can't gain truth. In Romans 1:21, it says they have a vain imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. And they thought they were wise, but they were fools, see. So men in the world without God are not only self-centered and useless in their thinking, but they are ignorant. By the way, the word darkened here is a most interesting perfect participle. Having the understanding darkened, a perfect participle, it simply means to make blind. And a perfect participle means something that happened in the past with continuing results. So they were darkened in their blindness and ignorance, and it's been that way all since. It's a continuing problem. But there's a kind of a pall that hangs over this verse that I want to point out to you. It's kind of a circular picture. They have their understanding darkened. Well, when did that happen? When did they get it darkened with continuing result? Oh, it's almost the feeling of judicial acting of God. It's almost as if God did it. It's almost as if God is the acting subject, acting on them. I think that's true. Why? Being alienated from the life of God, they were cut off from God's life, ignorant in their hearts, and blind, and the better word is hardness of heart. Now watch. Because man willfully is alienated from God, willfully ignorant, and willfully hardens his heart, he gets his understanding darkened judicially by a sovereign God. In other words, it's God affirming forever the choice that man makes. It's a serious thing. It is judicial blindness enacted upon one who willfully chooses to live without God. It's kind of illustrated with Pharaoh. You read in the story of the Exodus, and Pharaoh hardened his heart, and Pharaoh hardened his heart, and Pharaoh hardened his heart, and all of a sudden, like a thunderbolt, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. If you choose a certain lifestyle and are confirmed in that lifestyle, God judicially and sovereignly acts to keep that lifestyle a permanent thing. The perfect participle, blinded with results. Serious. Look again at verse 18. The problem is that this is an individual alienated from the life of God. God is the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And if you are alienated from God, you can't know the truth. You can't know it because you're dead to God's dimension. You're like a corpse. A corpse doesn't hear a conversation in a mortuary, nor does a spiritually dead individual hear God. That's something you can't comprehend. There's just no connection in those dimensions. And so it is that being alienated from the life of God, there's no life of God in them. And in their deadness, they are ignorant, and they pursue it, and they get harder and harder and harder, and then they have their understanding darkened. This is Romans 1. What happened in Romans 1? When they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, and thinking themselves to be wise, they were fools. And then it says, and God gave them over. God gave them over, and God gave them up. In other words, they chose the way to go, and God confirmed them in the choice. God judicially acting upon those who choose to live a life alienated from Him. There is a thought, too, at the end of verse 18. The word blindness is an interesting word, porosis. And it was used in medical terms for the kind of callus that forms around a broken bone, which is harder than the bone itself. It has reference to something that is hard, paralyzing. It is even also used in some extra-biblical medical source to refer to the kind of thing that forms in joints, like calcium forms, so that the joint ceases to function. It is an interruptive kind of hardening. It is a negative kind of hardening. That's what a pagan man's life is like. It's just like every time he acts against God, every time he takes another step of willful rejection, he pours more concrete into the hardening of his heart. And the more we do it, and the more we do it, and the more we do it, the less remorse we feel, and the less guilt we feel. And finally, real guilt is pushed so far down, it isn't felt at all. And the Bible says our conscience becomes seared as with a hot iron, and there's a petrified heart that is insensitive. And when it gets to that point, then it says their understanding is darkened. Judicially, God moves in response to a constant act of the will. You can see this distinction clearly by looking at John, for example, chapter 12, verse 37. And you'll see, quoting from the record of Isaiah, in verse 37, John 12, though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed not on him. They had sufficient information. But they chose to be alienated from the life of God. They chose to be ignorant. They chose to petrify their hearts with constant rejection, that the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spoke, Lord, who hath believed our